streaming is live and recording is live.
Good morning, everyone who's joining us. We're going to give others just a minute or two to continue joining. All right, good morning, everyone. I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us early on a Friday morning. We appreciate you all being here. This is the first in a series of 3 community conversations, which are opportunities to do a deeper dive into some of the most important topics related to the development of our regional transportation plan. Before we get started with the presentation, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at the welcome screen as you came in, but just to remind you, we do have interpretation services available. We have sign language interpreters on the right side of your screen, Spanish interpretation if you click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, closed captioning, and then also we do have an interactive presentation today. We'll be having 6 different poll questions interspersed throughout the presentation. But if at any time you think of a question, feel free to use the Q&A button also at the bottom of your screen to type something in. All of those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation in a single session. Next slide, please. I did want to do a couple of quick introductions before we get started. The first is my colleague Ted, who will be doing the mobility portion of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Brown. I'm the Transportation Performance Program Manager here at the Maricopa Association of Governments.
Thanks, Ted. And then Kristen, would you mind introducing yourself? Kristen is going to be leading the question and answer session at the end.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Dar, and I'm a member of the study team. My job today is to facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So I'd like you to direct you to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a button that says Q&A. And if you click that button, you can type your question in at any time during the presentation. We'll answer those live at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. And then my name is Jennifer Valentine. I'm also with the Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG, and I'm a transportation planner. I'll be covering the remainder of the presentation. Next slide. So this slide shows the process that we are using to develop our Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP. We started about 2 years ago with a values mapping exercise, which was really a polling activity designed to help us better understand what our residents think about transportation in our region, how it affects their quality of life, how it affects their day-to-day lives, and how it can be improved potentially. We used the results of the values mapping to develop 6 different regional goals that are really the foundation of our transportation plan. The early section of the plan included a lot of public outreach. Then we moved on to more of the technical work, where we started developing a needs catalog that includes all of the different types of projects that are really needed throughout our region, everything from new freeways to light rail extensions, to maintenance needs, to replacing buses. Because our region, like most others, has more needs than it has funding, we needed to next go through the process of evaluating those projects to see which are most meritable or most needed. Go to the next slide, Jason. So at that point, we entered into scenario planning, and that's really where we are now. So we developed 4 different scenarios or views of the world to help us even further decide which projects we should move forward with. Now we're again in the public outreach portion of our plan, where we're asking you to help us decide which of those scenarios and which elements of those scenarios should move forward to the final plan and the final list of projects. Next slide. So what is scenario planning? So we all know that we can't predict the future. A lot of things are changing rapidly in our world. So scenario planning is something that helps us consider a whole range of what could be reasonable possible futures. It's also a tool that helps us plan for uncertainty and a rapidly changing future, whether that's due to demographics or new technology. And then finally, it acts as a decision support tool that helps us make good investment decisions, again, under a range of different futures. Next slide. So as part of our RTP, we developed 2 different scenarios, each at 2 different funding levels. So the 2 scenarios are new capacity and system optimization. So the new capacity scenario is one way of looking at the world, or one potential way of spending our money. Under that scenario, we also looked at 2 potential funding levels. A half cent would be a continuation of our existing regional transportation sales tax, whereas a 1 cent would of course be an increase. I just wanted to point out that these are just 2 possible scenarios. It's entirely possible that we could end up with something in between or something different. We did the same thing on the system optimization side, and I'm going to go through what each of these scenarios means in the next couple of slides. Next slide. So the new capacity scenarios are really focused on expanding our transportation system. They focus on large projects like new roadways and rail extensions. These projects bring significant benefits, but also a pretty large price tag. And the trade-off there is that we're less able to invest in other areas like safety, technology, and active transportation. These large projects and large price tags also limit our ability to expand bus transit. Next slide. The system optimization scenarios focus on making our existing system as efficient and effective as possible, or optimizing our existing system. Under these scenarios, we're trying to spread the funding across several different types of transportation facilities and programs instead of just a few large new projects. Here we also emphasize investments in technology, safety, high occupancy vehicle lanes, and we're better able to enhance or expand bus transit. Next. So in terms of the funding piece, available funding has an important impact on how our transportation system looks, feels, and functions. And so it's no surprise that having additional funding helps us better keep pace with the growth that this region is experiencing and to provide more transportation options and alternatives. So currently, transportation projects in our region are funded through a combination of federal, regional, and local sources. So the pie chart at the bottom shows a pretty even split. About 47% of our transportation projects between 2006 and 2025, so about the last 20 years, have been funded by our regional half-cent sales tax, which is also known as Proposition 400 to many of us. And then the remainder is made up of a combination of state, federal, and local sources. So Proposition 400 is set to expire in 2025, which is a big part of the reason that funding is an important piece of the scenario planning conversation. We're wrestling with this idea of a half cent, so an extension, 1 cent, or something in between. And as I mentioned before, there are other combinations and possibilities. We just wanted to provide our policymakers and decision makers with some information to get the conversation going. So I mentioned in one of the early slides that the RTP goals are the foundation of our plan. So we thought it was important to introduce you to all of the goals, even though today we're only talking about the first two, which are safety and mobility. So I'll quickly highlight a couple of things about each of the goals. So safety is focused on all users of the transportation system, including pedestrians, bicyclists, riders on transit, and drivers. In terms of mobility, of course, we're looking at the movement of people and goods, but also equitable and appropriate access to goods and services and jobs. For responsiveness, we're interested in expanding travel choices to accommodate growth, but also to make sure that we're flexible and adaptable. For livability, we want to invest in transportation that supports human health and well-being, but also environmental sustainability. Preservation is about maintenance, so maintaining our system now and in the future. And prosperity focuses on economic competitiveness and growth. Next slide. So again, today we are focused on mobility and safety. Next slide. At this point, I will turn it over to Ted to start the conversation about mobility.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. Let's begin the mobility section with a quick poll. Next slide, please. Craig, can we pull up the first poll? Excellent. Our first question today is, what does mobility mean to you? Is it being able to get around quickly and easily? Is it not having to sit in traffic congestion? Or is it having choices about how you get around, whether that be by car, bus, bike, light rail, or anything in between? Please select one of the responses, and we'll give you just a minute or two to let everyone weigh in here. All right, it looks like we've had a good number of people weigh in. Give it just one more second here. Seems our most popular choice, if we want to pull up the results, is having choices about how to get around. Travel options are fantastic and important to a healthy region. Next slide, please. Mobility is a very important consideration when developing a regional transportation plan. It affects our quality of life, whether that be time spent in traffic or our ability to reach the places and things that are important to us. Mobility also impacts the region's economic competitiveness because it can impact the movement of goods through our region, as well as how desirable our region is to employers. Next slide, please. So we know mobility is important, but how do we measure it? We use the metrics or measures you see on the screen. Hours of delay is how much time we collectively spend in traffic. Annual delay per commuter is how much time the average commuter in our region spends in traffic each year. Congested lane miles is how many miles of our roadway system are congested on an average day. Level of service is a measure that speaks to how much of the capacity of a roadway is being utilized. And finally, we measure our level of access to jobs, services, and amenities. Next slide, please. Here we can see a chart and a few numbers related to delay. In the chart on your left, we are showing total hours of delay for 2025, our two half-cent scenarios, and a scenario where we don't extend the sales tax. On the right, you can see the number of hours the average commuter would spend in traffic each year. Currently, the average commuter in the region is spending about 45 hours or a whole work week of their life sitting in traffic. Without an extension, that number is expected to nearly double. Next slide, please. Accessibility is also an important measure when thinking about mobility. The charts on the slide highlight how much accessibility improves in each scenario compared to the future without an extension of the sales tax. More specifically, these charts highlight how accessibility improves for different segments of our regional population. The dashed line represents those not in one of those highlighted populations. Accessibility to work by auto or transit is improving across the board in either of our half-cent scenarios, but it is improving more for some populations than for others. Another way to think about these charts is given the same amount of time to get somewhere, you can get much further compared to the no extension scenario. Next slide, please. So what type of projects and programs can impact our mobility? First, there are many different kinds of roadway projects that can increase mobility on our transportation network. We can improve how well our traffic interchanges work to improve their efficiency. We can also increase the number of high occupancy vehicle or HOV lanes on our transportation system and increase the number of direct HOV connections to those lanes. We can also invest in intelligent transportation systems, or ITS, which focuses on using technology and digital connectivity to improve the efficiency and operation of our transportation system. The expansion of transit services also improves our regional mobility by providing people with travel options, increasing the number of options for those who can't or don't drive, and potentially removing single occupancy vehicles from our roadway. Finally, investing in and maintaining ADA accessibility also improves regional mobility. With that context, let's move on to another poll. Craig, if you would be so kind. We'd like to know what one thing is the greatest mobility-related challenge facing our region. Is it not being able to keep up with population growth? Is it delays and detours during construction projects? Is it people who prefer driving alone or are reluctant to try other modes? We'll give everyone just a minute here to provide their responses. Great, thank you all for your responses. We'll give this just one more second. All right, thank you. If we could pull up the results. It looks like this group feels that people who prefer driving alone or are reluctant to try other modes are the greatest mobility-related challenge facing our region. Next slide, please. We have one more mobility-related poll for you today. We'd love your reflections on how this plan can help preserve or improve mobility in our region. Please select all that apply from the following list. Craig, can we pull up? Thank you. Should this plan preserve or improve mobility in the region by investing in transit, bus or rail, improving pedestrian and bicycle facilities, expanding our freeways and other large roadways, or investing in a range of transportation alternatives? Once again, we'll wait just a minute here. Wonderful. Thank you all for your responses. If we could show the results. It looks like this group feels our top choice for preserving or improving mobility in our region is to improve pedestrian and bicycle facilities, with a second place tie on investing in transit, or a range of transportation alternatives. We'd like to turn now to another vital component of our plan, safety. Jennifer?
Thanks, Ted. Go ahead to the next slide. So we are structuring this portion of the presentation similar to the last section. So we will begin with a poll. Craig? So the question is, what does safety mean to you? And it might mean several things, but try to pick your top choice and just choose one. So the options are limiting the number of crashes on our roadways, limiting the severity of crashes on our roadways, or protecting vulnerable road users like pedestrians and bicyclists. Wait a few more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Thanks. Looks like the top choice was protecting vulnerable road users like pedestrians and bicyclists. Let's go to the next slide. So I don't think I have to convince you that safety matters, but it does help to put things in context. So we have a large portion of all Arizona residents living in the MAG region at about 2/3, but we're still overrepresented in almost all crash types. So 73% of all crashes in the state of Arizona occurred in the MAG region between 2009 and 2018. Similarly, with bicycle crashes and pedestrian crashes. We're also seeing an increase in most types of crashes, but especially fatal crashes, with an over 62% increase over the same year data period. So not surprisingly, safety is a top concern of many of our residents. We heard that loud and clear during the values mapping exercise at the beginning of the plan, and pretty much any time we do public outreach. Pedestrian and bicyclist safety is of particular concern. We've heard that today as well. We're also seeing huge increases in fatal pedestrian crashes, with almost a 200% increase during the same data period. Next slide. So there are a number of different ways to measure safety. We can look specifically at automobile crashes, lumping in all the different crash types. The chart on the bottom left-hand side of your screen shows how crashes have been increasing over the past 10 years or so. It also lines up crashes with vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, to show that relationship between people getting out and driving more and experiencing additional crashes. The chart on the right-hand side of your screen shows the number of fatal crashes, which is especially important because those are the types of crashes, along with those serious injuries, that really impact people's lives and society as a whole. And we're also seeing those increase over the data period. And then similarly with pedestrian and bicycle crashes, we can separate those out to see the trends distinct from automobile crashes. Next slide. So we have several different safety related projects and programs that are being considered in the development of our regional transportation plan. So the first is kind of an umbrella category of investment in the MAG safety program. So along with some of the large specific projects we have listed in the plan, we also have a number of different program areas that are really pots of money set aside for sometimes smaller, but really just investments over the course of the plan. So over the course of 20 plus years, we don't necessarily know all of the safety projects that will be needed. So this gives us some flexibility to invest over time. So we have different levels of safety program investment outlined in our 4 different scenarios. Aside from the safety program, as projects are designed and engineered, whether they're freeway, highway, roadway, or multimodal, safety is required and safety is designed and engineered into those projects in terms of geometric features and things like that. Also, active transportation projects are incredibly important in protecting our most vulnerable users, as we've already pointed out today. Dedicated facilities are especially important, including bicycle lanes, protected bicycle lanes, dedicated paths, sidewalks for pedestrians, other walkways, signals for aiding in crossing, which can be some of the most dangerous times for pedestrians and bicyclists, and then signage to help everyone better use the roadways and pathways together and understand their roles and responsibilities. Next slide. Craig, let's go to the next poll. So the question is, what is the greatest, again, please choose one, the greatest safety-related challenge facing our region? We have distracted driving, including texting or using cell phones, impaired driving due to drug and alcohol use, driver behavior like speeding or running red lights, and then pedestrian and bicycle crashes. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we have most of our responses in. So we had an even split between distracted driving, driver behavior, and pedestrian and bicycle crashes, which I think is fair because these are all important challenges facing our region. Next slide. And then our final poll, you want to bring that up, Craig, is how can this plan help preserve or improve safety in our region? And this time you can choose all that apply. So should we invest in dedicated pedestrian and bicycle facilities, invest in traffic signal improvements and coordination, invest in proven safety countermeasures and engineering solutions? Or should we be preparing for new transportation technology like autonomous vehicles? All right, let's close the poll. Looks like we had another tie between investing in dedicated pedestrian and bicycle facilities and investing in proven safety countermeasures and engineering solutions, which I think they were all great options. So there are no winners or losers here. Let's go to the next slide. So that concludes our presentation. We are open to questions and answers at this point, and Kristen is going to facilitate the Q&A session, and feel free to continue typing in questions if you think of them now.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have 4 questions so far. I will read the questions, and Jennifer, you can determine who is the best person to answer those questions. Our first question: these measures of mobility seem to be very motor vehicle focused. What about mobility for walking, biking, and transit?
Thanks, Kristen. That's a great question. I'm going to let Ted get us started since he covered the mobility portion, and then I might add.
Sure. Thank you for that question. The data needed is much more readily available for driving, which is why it's focused. However, we gave you a kind of a subsample of what is in a larger report we call our scenario planning report, which does include additional information about transit specifically.
Thanks, Ted. I would also just add that there's a lot of overlap between our 6 different goal areas. And sometimes instead of trying to measure the same thing in 2 different places or vice versa, so a lot of times some of the pedestrian and bicycle measures show up more under the livability conversation, for example. So we have another community conversation coming up next week where we'll discuss mobility. So you'll see more focus on some of the measures for pedestrian and bicycle there. Let's go to the next question.
Okay, thank you. I'm guessing this one will go to Ted too. Will you please explain the bar charts for mobility? It seems like you are focused on the sales tax increase, that you already have drawn conclusions.
Thank you for that question. We take direction from our policymakers. Our job is to provide the data to help inform their decision-making process. In those charts, we're demonstrating the consequences of not continuing the existing investment. And in the aforementioned bar chart, compared no extension to the half-cent continuation. You can see the impact of increasing the investment by going to our momentumplan.com and reviewing the full scenario planning report.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Does the planning include safety for bus and light rail riders?
That's a great question. Thank you. So a couple of things. First, we would look at bus and light rail a little bit differently because bus riders are sharing the roadways with motor vehicles. So a lot of the improvements that might happen on roadways and in some cases our freeways for something like a commuter or express bus would fall under that category, whereas light rail having a dedicated guideway would be a separate consideration. More generally, we work very closely with our partners at Valley Metro, who are more likely to do specific safety planning for transit modes. We also have the dedicated set aside I mentioned for the safety program. So it's possible that some of those types of plans and studies and smaller safety improvements could be housed under the safety program.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next question is, how does this plan address the segment of the population with no vehicles? How is this segment being engaged?
Ted, I'll let you start with the sort of mobility and accessibility piece, and then I'll move on to engagement.
Sure. Thank you again for the question. The plan also includes, robust segments of transit, particularly in the 1 cent scenarios. There is a large investment in bus transit for the region. I think that's probably our best approach to segments of the population who don't have a vehicle. We also have active transportation programs included as part of the scenarios.
Thanks, Ted. I think a couple of other pieces to point out would be the differences in the diversity of investment. So the system optimization scenarios allow us to invest in a lot more different types of programs and modes that might be more likely to benefit different types of people. We also look at the distribution of our investments across the region. So we're not just investing, 70, 80% of our funding in a specific area or a specific city. In terms of engagement during the planning process, we've made significant efforts to reach out to all different types of people across the region. We're having engagement opportunities at 7 a.m. on Fridays, over at the weekend, in the evenings, during the weekday, hoping that we'll hit and accommodate all different types of schedules. We also have 24/7 engagement opportunities and polling on our Momentum Plan website, so people can engage with us at their convenience. And then finally, we have a live chat available where you can chat with one of us between noon and 2 p.m. several days per week. So we are hoping to hear from people.
Thank you, Jennifer and Ted. Our next question, are you going to give us an opportunity to discuss our specific ideas about bus and light rail improvements?
Thank you for the question. I think, as I just mentioned, some of our engagement opportunities, I think there is space for that. Our current setup is accepting feedback specifically about the different scenarios. The scenarios are diverse enough that we've included streetcar, bus improvements, light rail extensions, and bus rapid transit, or BRT, in varying degrees based on the sort of philosophical differences between the scenarios and also the funding levels. So we do have questions designed to get your feedback, but also the live chat would be a great opportunity to talk more about your ideas.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ted, did you have something to add?
I'd just like to add that on our ourmomentumplan.com, you can submit your specific ideas, reflections. We also have interactive maps with all of the proposed projects for each scenario, where you can leave specific comments on those projects, or you can submit your feedback to momentum@azmag.gov.
Thank you, Ted. And I'll just take this opportunity also to encourage you to join the live chat at ourmomentumplan.com every day between noon and 2 p.m. That would be a great place to discuss your specific ideas. Our next question is, will recordings of the other sessions be made available online after to view if we can't attend live?
That's the easiest question we'll probably get all day. Yes, recordings of all of our sessions, including the 3 community conversations and the Pick Your Path presentations, will all be available on the Momentum website.
The next question is, how does your planning include getting more people to use public transportation?
I'll start answering that one. I think there are a couple of things. The first is really just about providing choices or alternatives. So people make decisions for a number of different reasons: personal preferences, life situation, values. So I think as a region and as a planning entity, the best we can do is just provide the choices for people to make the choices that work best for them. We do also have a transportation demand management, or TDM, program set aside as part of the plan, and that helps funnel money to programs like carpool, van pool, and other alternative transportation modes.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next question. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned projects are anticipated to go in the plan. How will those projects be identified?
I'm going to let Ted take this one because he's our numbers and mapping expert.
Thank you for that question. For nearly 2 years, we've gone through a performance-based process to identify ideas and evaluate where our highest priorities in the region may be. We've created 4 scenarios with those highest performing projects. Our policymakers will ultimately make the final decisions, but they need your feedback, which is why we're here this morning.
Thank you. And that leads us right into our next question, which is a great question. To whom will all of the information that you are gathering from all of this outreach go? And what will they do with it?
That is a great question. Thank you. And good segue from the previous question. So as Ted mentioned, the ultimate decision about the final list of projects and programs and funding set-asides in the plan are up to our regional policymakers. And we've heard from them many times that they care very much about what the public has to say and the priorities of our region. So in large part, we are doing this outreach and gathering this information for them to help inform their decision-making and make good informed decisions, sort of more on a more tangible basis. We will compile all of the feedback we receive from social media and other forms of outreach, and it will be incorporated into our plan document, most likely as an appendix, because it will be very lengthy. So people will be able to see their feedback incorporated into the plan.
Gotta unmute myself. Okay, here's another good question. I think you mentioned that a map of projects is available on the website, if I heard correctly. Where on the website can I find the map of projects to provide feedback?
Sure, I'll get that started and then let Ted weigh in if I miss anything. There's a specific tab, I think it's in the upper right-hand corner of the Momentum website. It should be in a bright salmon color, kind of like you see on the slide here where it says our Momentum plan, that says scenario planning. On the website, that bright salmon color indicates a place where we want your feedback and want you to get involved. So when you click on that, when you scroll down the page towards the bottom, there's an interactive map where you can click on projects and get more information about each one, or leave a comment specifically about one of those projects, whether it's a light rail extension, an arterial street, or a freeway project.
That's all the questions we have at this time. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type in your question for us. I'll just take this opportunity to remind everyone that we are hosting live chats with these planners from MAG every day, Monday through Saturday, between noon and 2 p.m. You just visit ourmomentumplan.com and you'll see the chat icon at the bottom right hand of your screen when you go to the homepage. Jennifer, we don't have any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kristen. I think Kristen already did a great job of reminding everyone about our live chat. I'm sure most of you, if you're here today, have been to the Momentum website, but that's really the best way to stay up to date with our opportunities for input and where we are in the planning process. We also have social media on Facebook and Instagram if you prefer those forums. And we just encourage you to remain involved in our process. We have a lot going on right now, deciding between all four of these great scenarios, and a lot of difficult decisions ahead. So with that, we very much appreciate all of you being here and engaging with us this morning. And feel free to reach out throughout the rest of the plan if you have additional comments or questions, or just want to say hello during our live chat. Thanks, everybody.